And without further ado, here's our speaker, Josh from Zcash Electric Coin Company.
Listen to that voice, man. So I work for the Electric Coin Company. I have a very long title, the Senior Vice President of Growth and Product Strategy and Regulatory Relations. So a bunch of stuff that's all kind of externally facing. So Zcash is a digital currency that launched in 2016. It's a fork of Bitcoin. And it was the first practical application of something called zero-knowledge proofs, which we'll get into here in a second. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history and context, tell you how it works, and then where it's going. So when we talk about this, often we talk about this in terms of Zcash being the HTTPS for money. So you guys know what that means, right? So if you use a browser today, everything's encrypted HTTPS. Because back in the day, when things first started, when I was in college, yes, I'm old, the Mosaic browser came out. And the Mosaic browser supported HTTP. And all of the traffic that went through the Mosaic browser, I can't see without my glasses. All right, all the traffic that came through the Mosaic browser was unencrypted. So when encryption first kind of came out and you had tools like PGP, there was a huge battle in the US. They wouldn't allow you to export it because it was for national security reasons. And part of what happened with that battle is people started printing out the code and putting it on t-shirts and putting it in books because that's free speech. Eventually Netscape added encryption to its browser, and that kicked off everything. That kicked off the commerce on the web. So this is what it looks like. HTTP, everything's visible. You put your credit card information in there, somebody's going to steal it. Encryption, nobody can see that stuff, nobody can steal it. So Bitcoin is a lot like HTTP. So what you can see, right, is this is just a representation of a block explorer, but you can see the sender, you can see the recipient, you can see the amount, and you can trace back through all of their history. So if somebody's able to associate you with that address, then they can see your financial history. It was necessary at the time when Bitcoin was enabled because of decentralization, right? We needed all of the nodes to be able to see all of the transactions and validate that it was all true, so that we knew that if Sally spent a Bitcoin, that Bitcoin was Sally's, and everybody could validate it. So Toshi was trying to figure it out. There's a post from him. He said, it's a very interesting topic. If a solution was found, a much better, easier, more convenient implementation of Bitcoin would be possible. And he was trying to figure out, both he and Hal Finney were trying to figure out how to add zero knowledge to Bitcoin. But they couldn't, and they thought pseudonymity would be good enough. Fast forward, some scientists figured it out. Scientists out of MIT and Johns Hopkins University, Technion, Tel Aviv, they figured out how to take zero knowledge cryptography, which was invented in MIT in the 1980s, and apply it to Bitcoin. And they approached the Bitcoin core team. So how many people know what zero knowledge is? Or zero knowledge cryptography? A little bit. So zero knowledge cryptography is just math, very complicated math, that allows you to prove something is true without disclosing anything about kind of the data behind it. So if you can imagine maybe going into a liquor store, and when you go into a liquor store to buy liquor, what are they going to do? With me, they don't card me anymore, but they may card you, and they take a look at your ID. And what can they see, right? They can see your name, your date of birth, your address, all kinds of things. So imagine you have creepy liquor store guy has all of that information visible. What if instead you could just provide a proof that you're old enough to buy the alcohol without revealing any of that information? That's what zero knowledge cryptography provides. So Sergey Brin calling it mind-boggling, Vitalik, moon math, but it's very complicated stuff. So that group of scientists went and talked to the Bitcoin core team. They say, let's add it to Bitcoin. Bitcoin core team said, hell no. The cryptography is way too novel. So instead, what you should do is you should fork Bitcoin and add it there as an experiment. And if it works, then we'll think about adding it to Bitcoin. So that group of 7 scientists reach out to that guy, who I don't know if you can see. It says Zuko's blog. This is Satoshi's website. So Zuko, who's the founder of Zcash, wrote the first blog about Bitcoin. He was in kind of that OG kind of cypherpunk world. So Zuko and a core of people took the Bitcoin core team, or Bitcoin core code, forked it, and added zero knowledge on top of it. And today, which that doesn't come out very well, Zcash is basically anywhere you can do crypto. There's some countries we could talk about later that have banned it for various reasons, but here in the United States, it's very pervasive. So some of the reasons they banned it, right, is because people think privacy is for criminals. But privacy is not really for criminals, right? Privacy is a human right. There's a famous quote from Edward Snowden arguing that you don't care about your right to privacy because you have nothing to hide is no different than saying you don't care about free speech because you have nothing to say. So here's how Zcash works. I'm going to give you some examples of how it's being used also. So Zcash has two types of addresses. One is transparent, which is just like just the same way that Bitcoin works, and the other is shielded, which has that zero knowledge cryptography on top of it. Not all places accept both types. Again, just as a quick reminder, this is what things look like on a block explorer with Bitcoin. This is kind of what it looks like with Zcash, depending on how you're using it. So you can have everything from everything completely encrypted to disclosing some information about where it's being sent or how it's being received. This is an example. Can you guys see this okay? All right, so it's like a little washed out. So I did this afternoon. This is my Edge wallet right up here. I have Zcash in there. And this is a transaction that I did like, I don't know, January 28th. So I went and looked at that on a Block Explorer. So I can go on my Edge wallet, I can go to View Advanced Transaction Data. It opens up Blockchair. It pulls up this transaction. And what can I see? I can see the fee. I can see that there were shielded inputs and outputs. But I can't see anything else about it. Senders, it shows shielded. The sender. Recipients, it shows shielded. You can't see anything. This is Bitcoin. Different transaction I pulled up today. You can see the sender, that address. I can see that they sent $226 worth of Bitcoin. I can see the recipient that received that. And then I can see the change, right? What's happening with all of these is all of these addresses are being labeled. They're being labeled by exchanges. They're being labeled by folks like Chain Analysis. There's even folks that are creating like these open source models that allow people to tag these addresses. So more and more they know kind of where the money's flowing, because they say they want to catch bad guys. But all that data is being collected. And we've seen some of the implications of some of this. Did you guys see this news? Yep. Okay, so where they were saying, by the way, Paul, I loved your blog post, or whoever put that out there in response to this. It was brilliant. But they were trying to block addresses. They're shutting down people that were donating to the truckers, regardless of your politics, regardless of what you think they were doing in the right or the wrong. The government stepped in, said, we're going to freeze this, and you can't have access to your own money. And we're going to do that based upon the addresses. We're going to track your flows, and then we're going to shut you down. This is a friend of mine, Mo Ghashim. Mo Ghashim is Syrian. He was a wealthy businessman, and he protested the Assad government. They shut down his assets. They took his homes. They took his businesses. He had to leave the country. He had to rebuild in Jordan. That's how he got into cryptocurrency. Now he goes around teaching Syrian refugees how to protect their assets from seizure and how to do it privately and securely. This one I saw just came up today. This was Mark Andreessen posted this. The Bank of England tells ministers to intervene on digital currency programming. They want to be able to program it so much that the government can completely control how and when you can spend your money. And if they give you money and they can track it to you, and they say, we want you to spend it on certain goods and services, but not other things, they want the ability to pull it back. This is Thais, and Thais lives in the South Bronx, and we do education programs in the South Bronx. We were teaching about Bitcoin, and she was looking at this stuff and looking at the block explorers, and she says, I can't use Bitcoin. I was like, Thais, why can't you use Bitcoin? She said, because if I have a wallet and I exchange Bitcoin with somebody in my building, then they can see my address and they can see how much is in my wallet, and I'm not safe. So when we talk about a wrench attack, right, theoretical wrench attack, she's living that. She's saying, I can't use it. I have to have privacy in order to secure myself. This is in the US, right? This isn't Mogashim, Syrian. This is in our own backyard, and this is the kind of the realities of cryptocurrency and having open blockchains. So there are two organizations that are working on Zcash, Electric Coin Company, which I work for, and the Zcash Foundation, which is a separate 501c3. Electric Coin Company, by the way, is also a 501c3. We have kind of some unique funding in that we get funded on-chain. So the community votes every 4 years to determine who they want to fund and how. So ECC receives 7% of the block rewards. It's currently a proof of stake chain. Miners have 80%. The Zcash Foundation gets 5%, and then 8% goes to a grants pool to pay for other developers. So some of the stuff that's now coming that we're really focused on, ECC is really focused on building a world-class UX for ZEC. So we know UX for crypto is pretty terrible in most cases, and we want people to be able to use it safely and securely and easily. Our next big network upgrade is Network Upgrade 5. We tend to have one every, 6 months to a year. Network Upgrade 5 includes a couple different things. I'll take you back a little bit in history. So part of zero knowledge, if you're not familiar, required something called a trusted setup in the beginning, and it required that different participants create a key that then gets destroyed. Interestingly, 5 of those participants are known, of the initial ones. 1 is not. In the setup of this, by the way, it has nothing to do with privacy. It has to do with whether or not people can potentially counterfeit coins. And so you want to avoid counterfeiting, right? When you have private and everything's private, then you can't see maybe how much is out there. So that gets really tricky. But in about 6 weeks, the 6th person will be revealed. So it'll be pretty interesting. So look for that. So this includes Network Upgrade 5 includes Halo, second iteration of Halo, which is a new zero-knowledge cryptography, which I won't get into, but it eliminates trusted setup, so that's no longer an issue anymore. It includes something called unified addresses that allows for different address types under a single address, which allows for something called shielded by default. So today, it's very computationally intensive and difficult with like HSMs to send Zcash shielded, like from an exchange. That was my countdown. From an exchange to a shielded wallet. So we're making that easier to allow for somebody to send from any exchange and have those funds automatically shielded. We'll be releasing a wallet so that we can kind of experiment with new features. We're doing some fun campaign stuff. This is Cypherpunk 0. We come from a long line of cypherpunks at Zcash. This campaign actually will launch tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Pacific time. It includes a toy from Mighty Jacks and NFTs and a prologue and some comics and some fun stuff. So if you're interested in getting up at 6 a.m. in the morning to buy a toy, you can do that and get that through Mighty Jacks. We have some partnerships with Protocol Labs, Filecoin Foundation, and Ethereum Foundation. So Halo, one of the things that Halo provides is recursive proofs. So right now you have blockchains that get passed along to every node, right? And when they get passed along to every node, that's a huge amount of data that just circulates over and over and over again. So one of the things that Halo provides, this new zero-knowledge cryptography, is the ability to send a proof that the prior state was true without having to send around the whole chain over and over again. So there's other protocols that are interested in seeing if they can apply that to their chains. So one is Protocol Labs, along with Filecoin Foundation, and then the other is Ethereum Foundation for Ethereum. Okay, so that's the stuff that's coming. The other things that we're doing is we're evaluating a move to proof of stake. We're looking at some platforms like Polkadot, like Cosmos. We're looking at cross-chain interop and doing some marketing and regulatory stuff. We're starting to play more in DeFi. There's some synthetic options that are out there. There's some more stuff that will come. We're doing these programs, like I mentioned, in the South Bronx. And then some others in the community are doing some other interesting things like ZSA. And ZSA stands for Zcash Shielded Asset, which would allow you to effectively take Bitcoin and shield it on the Zcash chain, or take your Ethereum and shield it. So we're working through the possibilities of that. And then finally, there's also grants. So again, if you're a developer and you want to work on this stuff, 8% of the total mining reward continues to feed this fund. So you can go to the Zcash Open Major Grants organization, request funds, and there's various projects available to work on. So that's Zcash.
Thanks, Josh. Do we have questions? I got a question up front right here.
Yeah, this NFT thing you got going on tomorrow, is this a Zcash native NFT? And how long has Zcash been having NFTs, if that's the case?
It's just total marketing. So what it is like we've created this character because we want to kind of highlight this kind of potential dystopian world against this what could be, right? And so we've created this character. There's a series of comic books. Part of that is there's toy that's available, and then the NFTs are also actually being minted on Ethereum. So they're Ethereum-based NFTs, and they're just things that we're giving away. So they'll be part of a toy purchase, and there'll be some other characters that come later.
What's the case for Zcash over Pirate Chain, which is private by default using ZK snarks, or Monero, which is private by default using ring signatures?
Yeah, so Pirate Chain is like a fork, right? Yeah. So, and for example, like Halo is not available on Pirate Chain. So it's still trusted setup. It's just copying code. They're not leading, as far as I know, anything. It's all kind of.
Well, I guess the question is like, why Zcash, which is optionally private, versus something that's private by default?
Yep. So there's a couple of reasons that optional privacy is actually not a bad thing, but this is argued a lot in the community. So one, for example, with the original cryptography, with zero-knowledge cryptography, it was too computationally intensive to work on a mobile device until recently, until we invented Sapling. You couldn't do it from an exchange until we got Sapling and started working with HSMs to be able to provide that. So Pirate Chain isn't kind of leading any of that innovation. They're not supported in those places. But also on the optional privacy, there's one thing really important to understand with privacy is really you don't get privacy from the transaction. You get privacy from where the money is stored. So if I've got a shielded Zcash wallet, and I send you have a transparent Zcash wallet, and I send you a transaction. For me, it's private. Nobody knows where it came from, right? For you, it might be open. There's different ways of handling that, but it may be like, I want to give to a political candidate. They need to keep that open. They want to see all that transaction stuff being open. They want it audited, all of that kind of stuff. That makes sense in that case. Some of it is just the history again. So the history being, like to get on Coinbase or any other exchange, they could not support shielded transactions. Some still can't or won't. There's two in the world that do, Gemini and the Rock trading in Italy. But Gemini was first. But it's difficult. Monero's like a completely different model. So it's more obfuscation than it is pure encryption.
Awesome. I was curious if you could say anything about the conversations you've been having with regulators. Should we be optimistic or pessimistic about some future regulatory state that can coexist harmoniously with something like Zcash or another privacy coin? Or if we should be pessimistic?
I'm going to get a drink of water. But I do want to answer that question because it's really important. Can I grab my glass? Wherever it is. Wherever it got. Did you take my water? That was my water. All right. No. Okay, so I've been working with regulators quite a bit. And when you say regulators, so there's regulators and policymakers, and then there's national. There's some local, like NYDFS. There's some national. There's some international organizations like FATF. There's other regulatory bodies like JVC, JFSA in Japan, and MAS in Singapore. And there's a lot of sneakiness that's going on with some of it. So generally speaking, regulators do not want privacy. Or they kind of understand the argument for privacy, but privacy from everybody else, but they want a backdoor. And so, thank you. So I had a conversation with, this is on camera, right? I had an organization with a regulatory body here in the US. They were trying to get a better understanding. They had published something out there asking for more information related to zero knowledge. If you really want to research who that is, you can go look that up on the web. But we did a briefing for them, but it was all, why can't we have a backdoor? It's like, well, even if we wanted to build a backdoor, which we don't, we can't. Because what's going to happen, it's just going to get forked. But that's what they want to know. And it's very kind of one-dimensional. And you say, okay, well, look, if you have visibility into everybody's transactions for, because everybody's transactions are on public blockchain for everybody to see for all time, you have visibility into that. That's what you want, right? Yep, that's what we want. Okay, China has visibility into that. Is that what you want? No. North Korea has visibility into that. Is that what you want? No. Somebody's future employer has visibility into that. Is that what you want? No. Just build us a back door. Well, who's going to hold the keys? Well, we can trust somebody like Google to hold the keys. What we know about every organization, including the US government, nobody is able to protect data. Everything has been hacked. Everything has been hacked. And it doesn't matter if it's even encrypted behind the scenes, that stuff gets hacked and it gets leaked. Nobody can protect it. The only way you can protect it is to have it encrypted with you. That's it. So what they're trying to do, though, is a couple different things. There's an international organization. I'm glad to ask this question. There's an international organization called FATF, Financial Action Task Force, right? Which is this conglomeration of all of these countries around the world, and they put out guidelines. You don't have to follow the guidelines, but if you don't follow the guidelines, then you're on a blacklist, right? And you don't get all these kind of financial benefits of being part of this international group. So there's a lot of pressure to follow the guidelines. Well, who is FATF really? It's a combination of the US Treasury, it's a combination of JFSA. In Japan, it's a combination of other people, other powers. In Japan doesn't want privacy coins, or hasn't wanted privacy coins. They banned all of them after a coin check hack in 2018. They were trying to protect their citizens. What they largely care about is money laundering, but also dark markets and some other things. And so their kind of initial knee-jerk was to get rid of everything. And we've had these long conversations with FSA, and they say, well, okay, we understand the need for privacy, but we want KYC on all the wallets. So any wallets that's used, and then we've already seen this happen in Korea. This has happened in Korea already, but Japan wants the same thing, which just means that you can't have edge. You can't have edge without them KYCing. It's not going to work. Like, it's an impossibility, right? that source code will go out and people will use their wallets, but that's what they're pushing for. So they're pushing that through FATF, and then what do we see happen with the infrastructure law? So the infrastructure law in Washington, D.C. Got added this language, which is this very broad language. So what do regulators do? They influence policy, and they influence policy so that it's very broad, and then they can interpret it very strictly. So we saw it with the Bank Secrecy Act. So now, $10,000 and it has to be disclosed. Stuff gets disclosed as a SAR, a suspicious activity report. And then they decide to change a variable now that they want it $600. But BSA, to begin with, unconstitutional. It breaks the Fourth Amendment, right? They can't search through your data without a warrant. But that's what's happening with BSA. What happened with Patriot Act? Same thing. Like, we need to save all the people. We need to protect all the people. So we're going to have this policy that's very, very broad, and then regulators can lock it down. What happened with infrastructure? In the back rooms, it's Yellen, it's Gensler, it's Warren working on language. That's what was happening, crafting language to get in there so they could interpret it as broadly as possible. So if you ask me if I'm optimistic or positive or pessimistic, like, I'm a realist, but I want to believe that we're going to get to the HTTPS of blockchains. And whether, by the way, if Monero wins because it's best, or Pirate Chain, actually I don't care, right? That's not why I'm in it, right? It's not about it. It's about protecting our freedoms. In order to have economic freedom, we have to have privacy. But we've got to fight these battles with regulators, because that's kind of in their nature to work that way. So anyway, sorry, long diatribe.
Any other questions?
We got time for one more.
Can you name a good cogent explanation of zero knowledge proof?
Can I give you an example?
Well, yeah, any reference work you can think of. It gives a good in-depth explanation.
Well, I can give you papers that get
Yeah, okay.
and you can go into some of the zero cash stuff that was what was Zcash is built on.
Zcash.
So I'm like, if you want to get me afterwards, I can send you some links.
Okay.
It's very complicated math, and it's stuff that the one thing that's super cool, by the way, when Zcash was invented with zero knowledge, there was like a half a dozen people in the world that understood this stuff and how to make it work. The 7 scientists that invented it knew how to do the math, but they didn't know how to do the engineering, and we had like 3 of the engineers that knew how to do it. That's not the case anymore. What's awesome is, like, the whole world is blown up with zero knowledge, so now we've got these kind of the roll-up stuff that's happening. We've got it being used, it's part of zero knowledge being used in Monero, and all these people are getting a better understanding. So we're building this momentum, and it's getting implemented in more and more tech, which is amazing. So there are actually more resources out there. There's actually a really cool video that I can send you. There's it's like a progression, and it's a professor out of MIT. What's that? That's the channel? Where it starts with the 5-year-old that he's explaining it to. He's explaining zero knowledge to a 5-year-old, and then he explains it to a high schooler, and then he explains it to a college student, and then he explains it to like a PhD. So it goes through this whole kind of progression. That might be a great place to start, because then you can kind of move through it and then go as deep as you want to go.
We did have one more.
So I have a question and I have a statement on zero knowledge proofs.
Mm?
So an easy way that I explain it to people is knowledge of something in room. So if, it's the green sock example. So the green sock on the safe. So if you can say, what's on top of the safe, you wouldn't necessarily know that unless you're in the room. You could say green sock. And so there's a way to kind of proof that without actually being in the room, had you been in the room before. So my question is, why moving away? Why are you moving away from proof of work?
Oh, great question. By the way, I'm going to give you another example, and I'm going to ask you a question. Another one that's used often when explaining zero knowledge, just conceptually, is where's Waldo? And so if you have like a picture like this, and you've got Waldo all over, how do you prove that you know where Waldo is without disclosing the actual location? So you can have a where's Waldo picture, And the person that knows where he is can cut out a little sized window for Waldo on a piece of cardboard and put it over the picture somewhere, right? So then when somebody sees the picture, they can see, okay, I can identify that Waldo exists without seeing exactly where it is in the picture. Where it gets like super, super complicated is zero knowledge is probabilistic. It's not even 100% certain. But you're dealing with such high probabilities that like it basically impossible that it would be wrong. So there's a number of advantages. So why are we moving to proof of stake potentially? So this is something that ECC is pushing forward, but the community hasn't bought off on it necessarily yet. So we've kind of got to go hold through that thing. It's not just for, there's people that think that it's necessary for protecting the environment. There's people within ECC that feel that, but that's not why we're choosing that strategy. There's also usability benefits. So there's questions of like, how do you deal with questions like finality? And transaction rollbacks when you're going cross-chain. So if we're moving, the idea with Zec is that Zec, the asset, is the product, and Zec, the asset, can live off of the Zcash chain on other chains as well. And so there's some trickiness in there as it relates to that. We also want to hear more from Zcash holders. So there was always this desire, and Zuko and Vitalik are buddies, and they talked about doing proof of stake for a long time. But the challenge is like that initial distribution of coins. So if you launch a new project and you immediately go to proof of stake, then very few people hold the majority of the coins. But if you do a model where over a long period of time the coins can be distributed, then it allows for moving to proof of stake more fairly. So it's something actually we've talked about for a long time, but it just wasn't feasible to do. So there's a couple of reasons.
All right, great questions, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. This is awesome. Let's give a big round of applause for Josh from Zcash, Electric Coin Company.